The summer after my senior year in high school was supposed to be carefree. Nothing more than long days with friends, late nights by the lake, and the usual small town routines. I was 17, living in rural West Virginia where the woods stretch on forever, and summer nights bring a stillness that can either soothe you or make you feel like the world's holding its breath. I never expected that summer night to change how I felt about those woods or about the kind of quiet that feels too deep. It was early July, the kind of evening that starts hot but cools just enough by dark to make sitting outside bearable. I was with my best friend Matt and a couple other guys, just hanging out near his family's property on the edge of the small town we'd grown up in. Matt's place backed up to thick woods, pine, oak, and some older maples, and behind those trees was a creek that everyone in town used to swim in during summer. The usual plan was to hang around the fire pit near the back porch, crack open some sodas, and talk about what we'd do after graduation. That night was no different at first. We set up a fire, threw a few steaks on the grill, and joked around. The bugs were relentless. Mosquitoes and gnats swarmed so much you barely noticed the crackling fire. Matt's little sister Jenna came out to say hi before heading inside. She warned us about a stray dog that had been spotted near the creek earlier that day, but no one paid much attention. We were all too focused on the warmth of the fire and the last light fading behind the trees. Around 10:30 p.m., the woods fell quiet. You could almost feel the insects and animals pulling back. The usual sounds faded. No owls hooting, no frogs croaking, not even the wind rustling the leaves. It was like the entire forest held its breath. We all noticed it, but none of us said anything. Then the tapping started. At first it was faint, soft, rhythmic knocks coming from the tree line just beyond the fire's glow. Tap, 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 like someone rapping their knuckles against a tree. We all froze and stared toward the dark woods. Probably a raccoon or something, Matt said, trying to sound casual, but even he looked uneasy. The tapping stopped for a moment, then started again, louder, more deliberate. Not random, not accidental. It was coming closer. The woods beyond the firelight grew darker and thicker with shadows. I could see the silhouette of a figure stepping between the trees, tall, thin, unnaturally still. I blinked hard, thinking it was just my eyes playing tricks in the firelight. But the figure didn't move except to take a slow, deliberate step forward. Matt grabbed his baseball bat and stood up. "Who's out there? Show yourself." His voice shook more than he wanted it to. The figure didn't answer. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, head tilted as if studying us. Then the tapping resumed, this time on the side of the cabin where Matt's dog usually slept, except the dog wasn't there. The tapping grew faster, urgent. Then it stopped suddenly. Out of the silence came a low, guttural growl. Not quite animal, not quite human. The hair on my neck stood up, and a cold sweat broke out across my back. "Let's get inside," Matt said, voice firm now but eyes wide. We scrambled to the porch, locking the door behind us. The windows rattled as if something large was brushing against them. Jenna was crying in the corner, clutching her knees. The power flickered, then went out, plunging the cabin into darkness, except for the dying fire pit outside. That's when the whispering started. Soft, sibilant words, impossible to understand but clearly directed at us. Leave. Go. Never come back. The bat in Matt's hands shook as he gripped it tighter. We huddled in the dark, listening to the whispers fade into the night, the scratching sounds circling the cabin, never stopping. Hours later, the sun started to rise. The noises stopped. When the light returned, the woods looked empty, peaceful. But the scratch marks remained on the port, deep gouges in the wood, like claws had raked across it. We never saw the figure again, but that night changed everything. I didn't sleep for days, and every time the summer heat rolls back around, I think about those woods, the tapping, and that terrible quiet. The kind of silence that hides something waiting, watching. Some things in the woods don't want to be found, and sometimes, if you listen closely on a summer night, you can still hear the tapping. Story, the end. It was one of those blistering summer nights in a small town in upstate New York, July, maybe early August, when the heat hangs heavy like a thick blanket, and the air smells of grass and distant bonfires. The kind of night where the windows are left wide open, and the only sound is the low buzz of cicadas, trying to drown out the stillness. I was 19 at the time, home for the summer from college, working at a local diner that closed around midnight. That night, I had finished my shift and was planning to walk home through the nearby park to avoid the longer road. The park was only a couple of miles from the diner, a patch of thick woods and old trails that locals usually avoided after dark. It wasn't a big deal, though. Most nights were quiet, and I'd done that walk a dozen times. But that night, something was different. I left the diner just after midnight, the air sticky against my skin. The streets were empty, save for the occasional stray car. I took my usual route, cutting through the park's edge to save time. The trail was dimly lit by an old street lamp flickering intermittently. The trees on either side stretched tall and black, their leaves whispering softly in the humid breeze. As I stepped onto the gravel path, I felt it immediately, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I glanced behind me, but all I saw were shadows and the wavering light of the street lamp. Probably just nerves from the long shift, I thought. I kept walking, trying to shake the feeling. The trail curved ahead, and I heard a faint rustling to my left in the underbrush. I stopped, heart quickening. Maybe a raccoon or a deer. But as I looked, I caught the faintest glimpse of something moving. Tall, thin, with limbs that seemed too long to be human. It slipped behind a tree before I could get a good look. I told myself to keep moving, but the rustling continued, following me at a distance, never close enough to see clearly, but always there. My pace quickened, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. Then the breeze died, and the cicadas went silent. The park plunged into an unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. I could see the exit of the park ahead, just past a small clearing. I was almost there when I heard a voice, a whisper, so faint it might have been my imagination. It sounded like someone calling my name, soft and urgent. "Hey, wait." I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. I scanned the clearing, but it was empty, except for the thick shadows between the trees. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound confident. No answer. I decided to run. My feet pounding the gravel, I burst through the clearing and onto the paved street beyond. The lights from nearby houses were bright and familiar, but the feeling didn't leave me. As I turned to glance back at the park entrance, I saw it standing there, just beyond the tree line. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that bent wrong like a broken doll. Its face was pale, almost translucent, with empty, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. Its mouth was stretched in a grin too wide to be human. I stopped dead, frozen in place. It raised a long, bony finger and pointed directly at me. I turned and ran without looking back, sprinting the rest of the way home with my heart hammering so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I locked every door and window and sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare come alive, a trick of the shadows. But when I finally looked at the clock, it was only 12:45 a.m. I had only been gone for 15 minutes, yet it felt like hours. The next morning, I told my parents what I'd seen, but they brushed it off as heat exhaustion or a bad dream. Weeks passed. I avoided the park altogether. But every summer night since then, I hear that whisper just at the edge of sleep, soft, calling my name, reminding me that whatever I saw that night was still out there, waiting. Story the end. The summer night was thick and sticky, the kind where the air clings to your skin and even the slightest breeze feels like a blessing. I was 22, home from college for the summer, working the graveyard shift at a small gas station on the outskirts of a rural town in Pennsylvania. The kind of place where everyone knows your name but nobody really knows your story. And summer nights were usually quiet, just the hum of insects and the occasional passing car. That night started like most others. Around midnight, I was restocking the snack shelves, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Outside, the parking lot was empty, except for a beat-up pickup that had been there for hours. I figured the driver was asleep or just killing time. The radio played softly in the background, a country station with low voices and slow songs. About an hour in, the truck's engine sputtered, and it drove off. I didn't think much of it until a few minutes later, the door chimed and a man walked in. He looked out of place, wearing a wrinkled suit, maybe in his late 40s, eyes sharp but tired. He didn't say much, just bought a soda and a pack of cigarettes. His presence felt off, like he belonged somewhere else, sometime else. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the late-night haze. After he left, things grew quiet again. I watched the clock tick past 2 a.m. The night outside seemed to deepen, the darkness more solid. That's when I saw movement near the edge of the gas station's property, past the row of old pine trees that bordered the road. A figure was standing there, just barely visible, tall, thin, and still. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I focused, I could see it was real. The figure wore a long coat that fluttered slightly in the faint wind, though the rest of the night air was still. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, heart starting to race. The figure didn't move or react. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" But there was no answer. No sound at all. Suddenly, the figure turned its head slowly, and I caught sight of its face in the dim moonlight. It was pale, too pale, almost translucent, with eyes that reflected the light like a cat's. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I stumbled back into the store, locked the door, and tried to steady my shaking hands. I checked security cameras. Nothing. The footage showed only the empty lot, no sign of anyone standing outside. Over the next few nights, I kept seeing glimpses of that figure, at the edge of the woods, in the rearview mirror of a car, lurking just out of sight. Each time it was the same, still, silent, watching. I told myself it was exhaustion or paranoia, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. One morning, I read a news article about a man who had disappeared near those woods years ago, last seen wearing a suit, wandering the night. They never found him. The description matched the figure I'd seen. That summer stretched on, and every night I dreaded the dark more than the last. I quit the job before the season ended, unable to shake the feeling that something was waiting, still waiting, on those summer nights. Story the end. It was the summer of 2014 in a small town in northern Michigan, a place where the days were long and bright, but the nights could get surprisingly cold and dark, even in July. I was 24 at the time, just finished with my first year of teaching, and spending the summer working odd jobs and hanging out with my closest friends. The town was quiet, sleepy even, surrounded by dense forests and miles of winding dirt roads that led nowhere but the lake, or old cabins people used for hunting. One particular Friday night, after a long day working at the local hardware store, my friends Matt, Sarah, and I decided to head out for a drive. We had no real plans, just wanted to get out of the house and enjoy the summer night air. The sun had set hours ago, but the sky was still deep blue, the stars beginning to prick through the fading light. We tossed a few beers in the cooler and drove in Matt's truck down to a favorite spot by the edge of a swampy forest, a place we often camped and told stories. When we arrived, the air was thick and still. No wind, no sounds except the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant croak of frogs. We settled on some fallen logs, cracked open beers, and talked quietly. The usual stories, college, plans for the future, the kind of stuff you tell when you're young and hopeful. But after a while, Sarah grew quiet. She kept glancing toward the edge of the forest, eyes wide and nervous. "I don't like this place tonight," she said finally. "It feels off." I laughed it off, but inside I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest looked darker than usual, like the shadows were deeper, more tangled. I told her it was probably just the heat making her jittery. Then Matt, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly asked if we wanted to go for a quick walk. There was a narrow trail leading into the woods, barely visible in the moonlight. Sarah immediately said no, but Matt was insistent. He said he wanted to check something he'd heard about. A local legend about a man who vanished in those woods decades ago. His body never found. The story was that on summer nights you could hear his footsteps or sometimes see him wandering near the swamp, looking for a way out. We argued for a bit, but curiosity got the better of us. We grabbed our flashlights and started down the trail. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the underbrush and twisted tree roots. The air grew cooler, the silence heavier. After about 10 minutes, the trail ended near a small clearing with stagnant water and thick reeds. The smell was sharp and earthy. Matt shone his flashlight toward the water, then suddenly froze. "Look," he whispered. I followed his gaze. Just beneath the surface of the water, something was moving. A dark shape, large and slow, barely visible in the murky swamp. It didn't splash or make noise, but it seemed alive. "What the hell is that?" Sarah asked, clutching my arm. We all watched in silence as the shape shifted slightly. Then, from the edge of the clearing came a sound, a low, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. My heart started racing. The stories about the missing man felt suddenly very real. Matt suggested we turn back, but before we could move, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was tall, thin, with pale skin that almost glowed in the moonlight. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to bore into us. We froze. The figure didn't speak or move toward us, but the presence was overwhelming. A cold wave washed over me, making my skin crawl. Then, with a sudden splash, the dark shape in the swamp lurched forward, disappearing beneath the water. The figure blinked once, then turned and vanished into the trees. We didn't hesitate. We ran back down the trail, branches scraping our faces and clothes, lungs burning from the sprint. When we burst back into the clearing where the truck was parked, we didn't stop to catch our breath. We jumped in and tore out of there, headlights cutting through the woods. None of us talked on the way back. The radio was off, the night pressing in tight around us. After that night, I never went back to that part of the forest. Matt and Sarah said they saw the same figure once more weeks later, standing by the roadside as Matt drove home late. Neither of them tried to stop. I don't know what we saw that night. Maybe it was some local legend come to life, or just shadows and stories playing tricks on tired minds. But every summer night, when the heat thickens the air and silence falls, I think about that pale figure in the woods, watching and waiting, and I wonder if it's still out there. Story the end. It was one of those scorching summer nights in a small town in Kentucky, the kind where the heat sticks to your skin and the air feels thick and heavy even after the sun has set. I was 19, home from college for the summer, working the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing much ever happens after dark. That night, I was closing alone again, the usual routine, sweeping the floor, restocking snacks, and counting the register. Around midnight, a car pulled into the lot. It was an old pickup, beaten up with a cracked windshield and headlights that flickered. The driver was a man I hadn't seen before, rough-looking, maybe late 40s, with a weather-beaten face and eyes that seemed hollow. He came inside quietly and asked for a bottle of water. I handed it to him, and he lingered near the door, glancing out into the night as if expecting someone. The silence in the store was heavy, and I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. Something about the way he stood there made me uneasy. Just as I was about to ask if he needed anything else, the power in the store flickered and went out. The emergency lights kicked on, casting long shadows across the aisles. The man didn't react. Instead, he looked at me and said, "You ever hear about the Hollow Woods?" I shook my head, unsure what to say. He leaned in closer. "Back behind Miller's farm, there's a patch of woods no one goes near after dark. People say if you're in there too long, you'll hear whispers calling your name, and then you're never seen again." I laughed nervously, but the man's face was serious, almost grim. I used to work the farms out there, saw things, heard things. Not human, not alive, just shadows. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside made both of us tense up. The man's eyes darkened, and he motioned toward the door. "Time for me to go," he said. He left quickly, and the power flickered back on a moment later. I locked up and headed home, the night feeling thicker and heavier than ever. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At night, I heard faint whispers outside my window, just barely audible over the hum of the crickets. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to walk to the edge of those woods the man had mentioned. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted with reds and oranges. The woods looked ordinary, just a dark patch of trees. But as I stepped closer, a chill ran down my spine. I heard it then. A faint whisper calling my name. I froze, heart pounding. The voice wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It was soft, yet urgent, pulling me deeper into the trees. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted. I turned to leave, and in that moment, a dark figure stepped from between the trees. It was tall and thin, with no clear features, just a shadow where a face should have been. I screamed and ran, not stopping until I was back at my porch, breathless and shaking. I never went near those woods again. That summer, A local man vanished in those same woods. Search parties found nothing, only his truck abandoned at the edge. The locals whispered about the hollow woods and the shadow that claimed him. Even now, years later, when the summer heat lingers and the night is thick with cicadas, I hear faint whispers calling my name on the wind. I never answer. Story, the end. The summer I turned 21, I decided to spend a few weeks working on my uncle's farm in northern Michigan. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest place tucked away near the edge of a dense forest, far from the nearest town. My uncle lived there with his wife and 2 kids, and he said the work would be easy enough for a city kid like me to handle. The days were long and hot, filled with the kind of hard labor you forget about once the sweat dries off your skin. But it was the nights that stuck with me. The heavy, humid nights when the sun slipped beneath the horizon and everything seemed to slow down, even the sounds of the forest. One night, about a week into my stay, I was out on the back porch after dinner. The sky was dark, the stars barely visible behind a veil of thick, low clouds. The only light came from a single porch bulb that flickered occasionally, casting long shadows over the uneven ground. My uncle and his family had gone to bed early, but I wanted to sit outside a while longer. The stillness was almost comforting, until I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, like branches snapping somewhere deep in the woods behind the house. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal, but then the sound grew louder, closer. Something was moving through the trees, slow but deliberate, breaking twigs and crunching leaves underfoot. I stood up, trying to see through the darkness, but the woods were thick and the night was too dark to make out much. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering again. Then I heard it, a soft, low whisper coming from the edge of the forest. It wasn't words I recognized, just a hissing, a kind of broken chant. The voice was cracked and uneven, like it belonged to someone older than time. My heart started pounding. I wasn't sure if I should call out or run inside. Before I could decide, the whisper grew louder and more urgent, repeating the same strange syllables over and over. I grabbed the flashlight from the porch table and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the blackness, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line, a tall, thin shape with what looked like ragged clothes hanging off it. Then it moved, slipping between the trees faster than any person should be able to. The whispering stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than the night air itself. I bolted inside, locking the door behind me. The porch light flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging the yard into darkness. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for sounds, but nothing came back. Just the quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old house settling. The next morning, I asked my uncle if anyone else had ever seen or heard strange things at night. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Some say the woods around here have always held secrets. Folks don't like to talk about it much." A few days later, I learned that a man had disappeared in those very woods a few years earlier. No trace was ever found. The locals whispered that the forest was cursed or haunted by something that didn't want to be disturbed. I left the farm not long after, but sometimes on hot summer nights, I still remember that whisper in the woods and the feeling that something was watching, waiting just beyond the edge of the light. Story, the end. It was the summer of 2007, and I had just turned 19. I was spending my last summer break before college in a small town in upstate New York, where I grew up. The kind of place where the nights are quiet except for the hum of insects and the occasional owl hooting from the woods. I was used to that peacefulness, but that one summer night changed everything. I was with 2 friends, Mike and Jenny. We'd been hanging out all day, swimming at the local lake, riding our bikes, and generally enjoying the last warm days before school started again. That night, Mike suggested we take his dad's old pickup and drive out to a spot he liked by the edge of the woods, a place few people went. He said the stars there were incredible, and we could sit by a small clearing, talk, and just relax. We got there just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was heavy, thick with humidity, and the sky turned a deep purple, stars slowly poking through the darkness. The woods around us were dense and alive with nighttime sounds. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of a barred owl, and the steady chirp of crickets. We spread out a blanket in the clearing and pulled out some snacks from Mike's cooler. We joked, played music softly on a portable speaker, and stared up at the sky. The moon was just a sliver, but bright enough to cast long shadows through the trees. After a while, Jenny got quiet, her eyes fixed on something at the edge of the woods. "Do you guys see that?" she whispered. At first I thought she was joking, but then I saw it too, a faint flicker of movement, like a shadow slipping between the trunks. It didn't look like an animal. It was too slow, deliberate, and it was close. Mike laughed nervously. Probably just a raccoon or something. But the movement repeated, and this time I felt it. That sick feeling in the pit of my stomach when something's wrong. The air suddenly felt colder, even though the heat hadn't changed. Then came the sound, low, almost like a growl mixed with a rasp coming from the woods. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Jenny grabbed my arm. "Maybe we should leave." Mike shook his head. "It's probably nothing. We're just letting our imaginations get the best of us." But as we packed up, the sounds grew closer. Footsteps crunching on leaves, slow and heavy. Not animal footsteps, but human-sized and deliberate. We froze, eyes darting toward the dark tree line. Then, from between the trees, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like old, tattered clothes. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, and his eyes— I can't describe his eyes except to say they weren't quite right. They were too dark, almost empty, like holes in his face. He stood still, watching us, head tilted slightly as if curious. We didn't move. Mike grabbed his phone, flashlight on, and shined it directly at the figure. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, and with every step, the air seemed to grow colder. Jenny started to cry quietly. I could barely breathe. Then the man stopped about 20 feet away, raised a hand slowly, and pointed directly at us. Before we could react, the forest erupted in a chorus of eerie, high-pitched screams, like hundreds of voices all crying out at once. It was deafening and chilling, and for a moment I thought I was going to lose my mind. The man vanished. The sounds stopped. We ran. We ran like hell, scrambling through the woods, not caring about scratches or branches hitting our faces, just desperate to get away. When we finally burst out onto the road, the truck was still there, and we piled in without saying a word. The drive back was silent except for heavy breathing and the occasional sob from Jenny. We never spoke about what had happened after that night. We didn't return to that clearing or the woods, but every summer since, when the heat hangs thick in the air and the nights feel stiller than they should, I remember that man. And the voices. Sometimes when I'm alone outside, I swear I hear that same eerie scream carried on the wind, as if he's still waiting for someone to come back. Story the end. The summer of 2003 was hotter than usual in northern Alabama. Nights stretched long and thick with humidity, the kind that made even breathing feel like a chore. I was 21 and working the graveyard shift at a small convenience store on the outskirts of town. It was a dead-end job, but it paid the bills, and I didn't have many options. The store sat at the junction of two country roads, surrounded by dense woods on one side and a few scattered houses on the other. There wasn't much traffic, especially at night, and the only sounds were the constant hum of the refrigeration units and the distant chorus of cicadas. That particular Saturday night felt different from the moment I clocked in. The air inside the store was heavy, stale, and I had the feeling something was off. At first, I shrugged it off as summer heat playing tricks on my senses. The place was quiet for hours, no customers, just the flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional buzzing of the soda cooler. I kept checking the time on the clock behind the counter, counting down the minutes until dawn. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard the bell on the front door jingle softly. A man stepped in, tall, thin, wearing a faded baseball cap and a long dark coat despite the heat. His face was pale, almost gaunt, and his eyes were sunken. He didn't say a word, just stood near the counter, staring at me. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, then pointed toward the back of the store where the restrooms were. It was odd. Most people asked for snacks or drinks, not the bathroom, but I figured maybe he was just tired or passing through. I unlocked the restroom door and gestured toward it. He didn't move right away. Instead, he turned his head toward the window behind the counter and looked out into the dark night. His eyes narrowed and a faint smile crept across his lips, though it didn't reach his cold, pale eyes. That's when the power flickered and the lights dimmed. The air inside the store suddenly grew colder, sending a shiver down my spine. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the door, and as he did, a chilling breeze swept through the store, though all the windows were shut tight. Suddenly, the radio on the counter crackled to life. Static filled the small space, then a woman's voice whispered, "Don't look behind you." I turned, heart pounding. The restroom door was open now, though I hadn't seen him go in. I flicked on the light inside the bathroom. It was empty. I spun back around, but the man was gone. The store was silent again, except for the soft buzzing of the lights. I checked the security cameras. Nothing unusual. No one had left or entered except him. But when I looked closer at the feed, the figure on the screen seemed distorted, flickering like an old film reel. That night, I locked up early and left, still shaken. The next day, the local news reported a missing person case, a man matching the description of the customer, last seen near the same intersection around midnight. Apparently, he had disappeared without a trace, and his family was desperate for answers. I never went back to that store at night, but sometimes when the summer air is thick and the cicadas start to sing, I swear I hear that whisper through the trees. "Don't look behind you." Story the end. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and summer nights stretch out long and slow, with the scent of freshly cut grass and the hum of insects filling the air. The summer of 2018 was one of those typical summers, hot, humid, and full of lazy evenings. But one night in particular sticks with me, a night that changed how I saw everything. I was 22, working at a local diner downtown. It was a Friday night, and the diner was packed with the usual crowd. Families celebrating the start of the weekend, couples holding hands, and teenagers laughing over milkshakes. I was closing that night, which meant by 11 p.m., I'd be locked up and heading home alone. My house was about a 10-minute drive out of town, down a narrow country road flanked by cornfields and patches of woods. The road was quiet at night, sometimes too quiet, lit only by the faint glow of the moon and the headlights cutting through the darkness. After clocking out, I climbed into my old pickup and started down the road. The windows were down despite the humidity, and the warm night air rushed in as I drove. Somewhere near the halfway point between town and my house, I noticed a figure standing near the edge of the cornfield, just off the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker or maybe someone having car trouble. I slowed down as I passed, squinting to see. The person was a man, tall, wearing dark clothes, but what made my stomach knot was how still he was, like a statue. His face was shadowed beneath a baseball cap pulled low, but I could swear he was watching me. I kept driving, telling myself it was nothing, maybe a farmer or someone walking home. But about a mile down the road, the feeling hit me. That prickling on the back of my neck, that sense of being watched. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated the man again. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road, right in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The truck screeched to a halt maybe 5 feet from him. He didn't move, just stood there, staring. I flicked the high beams on and off, hoping to startle him, but he stayed still, unmoving, his face almost unreadable in the harsh light. I honked the horn. No reaction. Panicked, I threw the truck into reverse, then shifted into drive and sped past him. My hands trembled on the wheel as I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was gone. The rest of the drive home felt like a blur. When I pulled into my driveway, I fumbled for my keys, locking the doors behind me before even stepping inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's silhouette, unmoving in the dark road. Over the next week, I found myself avoiding driving that stretch of road at night. But one evening, about a week later, my friend called asking if I wanted to meet at the local convenience store after midnight. Reluctantly, I agreed. After grabbing some snacks, we left together and took the long way back to my house, avoiding that road. But as we pulled up to a stop sign at a T intersection near a cornfield, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There he was, standing just past the edge of the corn, eyes glowing faintly in the streetlight. This time, he wasn't alone, Behind him, two more figures appeared, all motionless, all watching. I slammed my foot on the gas and didn't look back until we were safely inside my house. I told a few people about it, but everyone just said maybe it was a prank or someone messing with me. I don't know what that man or those men wanted, but every summer night since then, I've felt that same chill, that same dread, like something's waiting just beyond the shadows. Story the end.